Hello everyone, no one of consequence here, back again with a new video. This is another installment in my DM advice series where I offer suggestions for running classic Dungeons & Dragons adventure modules. In this episode, I will be talking about Dungeon Module D1, Descent into the Depths of the Earth. So as always, spoiler alert, this video is intended for Dungeon Masters only. If you intend to adventure through this module as a player, then watching this video will spoil the experience for you. First, let's talk a little bit about the history of this adventure module. So it was published by TSR in 1978. As I've explained in other videos in the series, TSR was initially hesitant to publish adventure modules, thinking that there would be little interest. And their reasoning was, why would people buy adventure modules when they could just create their own scenarios? Well, Judges Guild proved that there was a great deal of interest in published adventures. This module was the tournament adventure used at the Gen Con 11 game convention in 1978. So TSR did not have to create this module from scratch when they decided to publish it. They simply adapted already written material. This adventure was later republished as part of module D1-2 in 1981. And it was published again as part of the Super module GDQ 1-7, Queen of the Spiders, in 1986. Now, if you own any of these products, then you have the core information you need to run this adventure module. They all contain the same basic details, and there's really no difference between them. If you do not own any of these versions of the adventure, you can get reprints or PDFs from ttrpg or DM's Guild. GDQ 1-7 also included a lot of new background information, which was intended to tie together all the adventures of the series in a more logical manner. I personally didn't care for the background scenario given in the module. I instead made up my own campaign lore. But the good news is that no matter which version of the module you use, it is easily adaptable to any modern OSR game system. And that's if you're not using the original AD&D rule set or even the original basic D&D rules. Next, we'll talk about some more recent products associated with the original D1 adventure module. First is this one, this module called Descent into the Netherdeep. It was published by Kenzer Co. in 2003. And it's a semi-parody of the original D1 module. The module's cover art, which is clearly based on the illustration from the original module, provides a clue that this product is something of a parody. The module was written for Hackmaster 4th edition, which is a modified version of 1st and 2nd edition AD&D. Although it's somewhat of a parody, it is still a good source of additional information that you could use in the original D1 module. Unfortunately, though, this product is no longer commercially available in any form. So your best bet, if you want to try to get a copy, would be to search sites like eBay for a used copy. Now, these two products contain guidelines for converting the original D1 module to the 5th edition D&D rules. Now, I don't actually own either one of these, so I cannot speak to their quality. I'm just letting you know that they exist. Just like before, these two products are available at DriveThruRPG or at the DM's Guild. The thing to keep in mind, though, these are not complete standalone products. You'll still need a copy of the original D1 adventure in order to use them. But again, you can obtain all of them from DriveThruRPG or DM's Guild. So all of this background information brings us to the module itself. This is the first module in the Descent series, and it introduces the Underdark as a type of wilderness adventure setting. When you hear the term wilderness adventure, you would normally think of the wilds on the surface world. But this module takes that concept and moves it underground. Now, instead of limiting underground adventuring to a self-contained dungeon, the players have an entirely new exotic wilderness to explore. If you're considering running this adventure module for your players, pay attention to these statements in the introduction. It says, those familiar with the previous modules in this scenario will be aware that they are designed for play only by players of above average ability who have characters of high level, 9th or 10th minimum. The module is designed for characters of about 10th level with a party size of 7 to 9. So as you can see, this module is intended for experienced players running high-level characters. A new player who is simply given a high-level character to run will probably not do well in this module. So, moving on. In the introduction, it also says, despite the difficulty of the two encounter areas prior to the terminal one, this module is not as difficult and demanding as was Hall of the Fire Giant King, for example. So, in other words, if you're running this module as part of the entire TGDQ campaign, this adventure is not intended to be as difficult as was the previous one, Module G3. Now, that being said, Gygax goes on to provide this warning. There is plenty of danger, though, and any party bent on self-destruction can accomplish the task with relative ease. So take that message for what it's worth. Alright, this is the last chance for potential players of this adventure to drop out of the video before the real spoilers begin to be revealed. Alright, moving on. Players adventuring through this module will encounter Drow elves who have a lot of innate abilities. This is a small sample of the description, which appears in the back of Module G3, Hall of the Fire Giant King. It was provided there because this series of modules was published before the Drow appeared in the Monster Manual. Now, I personally created a cheat sheet which consolidates on one page all of the various Drow weapons and abilities. This kept me from having to continually flip to the back of the module or through the pages of a rulebook. This slide just shows a sample of my own cheat sheet, but you as the DM might find it helpful to create something similar before running this module. Another new creature, which appears for the first time in this module, is the Germlane. This image just shows a stat block, but the module includes a lot of additional information about this monster. These creatures do not appear in any set encounter in the module, but they can turn up as a random encounter. So you might want to create another cheat sheet for these monsters as well, just in case that does happen. If you're running this module as part of the overall campaign, the characters will have found this partial map of the Underdark at the end of Module G3. Or, if you're starting the players with this module, you will probably want to come up with a scenario which explains how the characters have acquired this map. In either case, the adventure begins at the bottom right corner of the map as pointed out here. And the character's ultimate destination is the area pointed out here. Now the map scale is 1 hex equals 1 mile. So, as you can see, the characters must travel a great distance through the Underdark before arriving at the primary adventure location. The module also includes 3 different tables for generating random encounters, which are to be used while the characters are traveling through the Underdark. As you can see here, the tables are listed as primary passage, secondary passage, and tertiary passage. What those descriptors are referring to is the different sizes of passages through which the characters can travel. The module includes a sample map which depicts from left to right typical examples of primary, secondary, and tertiary passages. So, as a DM, you will roll on the appropriate random encounter table depending on where the characters are currently traveling. Going back to the primary passage random encounter table, you can see that many of the possible results are various Drow elves. The module includes detailed information on how to generate each of these different groups of Drow. I highly recommend that you create sample groups of these Drow ahead of time before gameplay starts, because you really don't want to be rolling up all these details during the middle of the adventure and causing your players to wait. Now, one thing not included with the original module, but which can be found in the Queen of the Spiders module, is this list of all the Drow houses, as well as the merchant clans associated with each one. This list groups the Drow houses by allegiance. So, as you can see pointed out here, it starts with the Drow houses loyal to the demon queen Loth. Then it goes on to list the rival faction of Drow houses who worship the elder elemental god. And finally, it mentions a couple of independent Drow merchant clans not associated or not affiliated with any house and which are neutral. The list also provides the name of each Drow house, along with the symbol of each merchant clan affiliated with them. The leaders of any Drow group of Drow will have concealed somewhere on their person a small pin or brooch upon which is inscribed the name of their house, written in Drow, of course. Or, if it's a merchant, the token will be in the shape of the clan symbol. If any Drow leaders are killed or captured by the characters, a careful search can reveal these items. I strongly recommend that you determine this information ahead of time as well, for any group of Drow that you pre-generate. These small details can be very important, especially if the players are running through the entire campaign series. Possessing a Drow house or merchant clan token might affect how a later encounter with other Drow play out. Okay, so going back to the random encounter tables, I've highlighted a few possible results found on the secondary passage table. Again, several of them are groups of Drow. It's also possible that the characters might encounter mind flayers, which of course are very powerful creatures. You should be prepared to run monsters like these ahead of time too, just in case they turn up on a random encounter roll. And finally, on the tertiary random encounter table, the characters might encounter the new Germlane or even a Lich. Obviously, it would be a good idea to pre-generate a Lich or two, just in case characters happen to run into one of those while traveling. Okay, so now that we've covered random encounters, let's go over the module's two set encounters, which occur before the primary adventure location. Again, this map shows both the start point and the end point of the adventure module. However, in between is the first of two set encounters, the location of which is pointed out here. The first encounter is a Drow checkpoint, which the characters cannot avoid. Now, it's not necessary to pre-generate the details for this group, because they'll be provided in the module. I don't show it here, but the module provides a tactical map for use with this encounter. You'll want to consult it ahead of time and plot out where each individual Drow is located when the characters arrive. As I mentioned a few moments ago, the leaders of this checkpoint carry hidden symbols, which indicate their Drow house allegiance. But also note that the checkpoint commander carries a Loth spider pin instead of Drow house identification. This is because she is a high priestess of a major temple dedicated to Loth, which is described in Module D3, Vault of the Drow. Therefore, she is not affiliated with any specific Drow house. Moving on, this map indicates the location of the second set encounter found in the module, which I've pointed out here. The module text says the second encounter area can be avoided by taking a circuitous route of secondary and tertiary passages. Hex M12 is a secret advanced post for Elithiad Mind Flayers expansion in the area. As illustrated here, if the characters follow the primary passage running due northwest from the Drow checkpoint, they will definitely encounter the Mind Flayer outpost. However, if the players decide to take the alternate route pointed out here, they can bypass the Mind Flayer outpost, or they might choose to approach that location from behind. As the DM, you'll just have to be prepared for every possibility ahead of time. Now, if the characters do take that alternate route, I would definitely have them run into 2 or 3 random encounters along the way. I would even go so far as to determine those encounters ahead of time and have them pre-positioned instead of randomly rolling during gameplay. Note that all 3 passage types will be encountered along this alternate route. It starts out with primary, and then it drops down to secondary, and then finally goes to tertiary. However, assuming that the characters do travel towards the Mind Flayer outpost, you will want to plan out that encounter ahead of time as well. As described in the module text, it uses the same tactical map as does the Drow checkpoint. It's merely flipped around. Note also that there are a dozen were-rats working with the Mind Flayers. They serve as scouts and lookouts, and will make it virtually impossible for the characters to sneak up on the Mind Flayers undetected. Now, if your campaign uses psionics, then play out any battles with the Mind Flayers as best you know how. However, if you do not use psionics, like me, then you should prepare for this encounter ahead of time by using these tables found on page 78 of the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. In short, the Mind Flayers will use their psionic-like abilities against any threat, whether your campaign uses actual psionics or not. This encounter description goes on to say, if the expedition kills the Mind Flayers and prove their deed to any Drow they happen to meet, it is 90% probable that the Dark Elves will be friendly with the party despite any past conflicts, and, if the adventurers express an interest, give them a black medallion. The pass, which will enable them to go through the Drow areas without undue questioning or molestation. So as you can see, it can be worth the player's while to defeat the Mind Flayers, as it can make their passage to the Underdark much easier. Now, the players won't expect this benefit at the time, but they should at least understand by now that the Drow and the Mind Flayers have animosity towards one another. The rest they'll just have to figure out on their own. Okay, so all of this now brings us to the so-called Great Cavern, which is the module's primary adventure location, and is pointed out here. This is the map of the Great Cavern, which is provided with the adventure module. And here is the same location depicted in a zoomed out view of a virtual tabletop map. This is the same map I used in my own Roll20 campaign. Now, the primary inhabitants of the Great Cavern are tribes of trolls, troglodytes, and bugbears. You'll find that there are a combined 300 or so of them in this module. But if that weren't enough, there are many other monsters dwelling in the Great Cavern as well. To get a better idea of what all the characters may face here, let's take a detailed tour around the VTT map. We'll start with the upper left corner of the map and go clockwise from there. First, there is a purple worm guarding a nest of its eggs, which is pointed out here. Also in the same area is another Drow outpost. We'll come back to them a little later. This cavern here houses a large group of gargoyles. The small chamber circled here is actually the lair of a lich. We'll come back to him later as well. These chambers are the temporary lair of a few dozen ghouls and ghasts, which are passing through this area. This side chamber houses a giant slug. And this location is the westernmost area occupied by the Bugbear tribe. Now moving on to the upper right corner of the map. This shows the entirety of the Bugbear tribe's chambers. And these chambers house a large part of the Troglodyte tribe. Moving on to the lower right corner of the map. Circled here are additional troglodyte living chambers. And here is an isolated group of trolls. More trolls, including their king and his personal bodyguard, live here. Circled here are still more troglodyte living quarters. And a lot more of the troll tribe live in these chambers. Located here are still yet more troglodytes, including their chieftain. And pointed out here are 2 tamed wyverns, which the troglodyte chieftain and his lieutenant ride into battle. Moving on to the lower left corner of the map. Circled here are still yet more troglodytes. And many more trolls as well. This area includes a chamber inhabited by piercers as well as a trapper. And a second group of gargoyles live here. And that brings us back to the purple worm where we started. I skipped this area earlier, but this is a mushroom forest at the far eastern side of the Great Cavern. And as you might expect, it hides a few hazards as well. By now, you might be asking yourself, how is it possible for all these monsters to live peacefully in such close proximity to one another? At one point in the module, Gygax does take a crack at explaining it. He says, these trogs are one tribe and they work in cooperation with the trolls and bugbears. The cooperation is demanded by the Dark Elves, of course, but the inhabitants of the place have found that they are all prospering through mutual aid, so they now come willingly to each other's assistance. Okay, I'll buy that. However, the ultra-realist dungeon master might still ponder details like food, for example. The sheer amount of food needed to sustain so many creatures on a daily basis would be enormous. But I guess we'll just accept that it all works somehow. Anyway, now let's revisit that Drow outpost I mentioned earlier. The module already provides their details, so you do not need to generate them yourself ahead of time. The module map even shows where the on-duty Drow sentries are posted, although I don't depict that here. The module text also tells you which house these Drow belong to. It's highlighted here. Moving on, let's return to that Lich I mentioned earlier. The module provides his hit points, but that's all regarding his stats. You'll need to consult the monster manual to get the rest of his stats and abilities. The module goes on to say, this horrid creature normally rests on the ledge at the southern tip of the place. It will maintain the illusion and not attack any intruders unless they are using magic spells of any sort or are obviously detecting magic. So, as you can see, the Lich is concealed behind an illusion, and it's possible that the characters will never even realize that he is there. Of course, you must still be prepared for the possibility that the characters will discover him. I don't show it here, but the module does provide his memorized spell list. So it would be a good idea to have those spell descriptions handy when you run this module. Alright, this concludes my commentary on the module's highlights. So now let's summarize the module and my overall thoughts on it. The entire module has only 11 pages of text. Obviously, a lot of information is crammed into those 11 pages. I'm confident that if this module were written today, it would be a book of 100 pages or more, plus maps. This module introduces the Underdark and the concept of the underground as a wilderness setting. This is not a beginner's module, and that includes the Dungeon Master. This module is extremely challenging and requires a lot of DM prep to properly run it. This module is extremely combat heavy, although there are some opportunities for negotiation and diplomacy. Old school dungeon masters, who require players to keep track of expendable supplies, should definitely enjoy this module. As should be obvious by now, the players can potentially expend a lot of their resources working through this adventure. I consider this module a must-play as part of the TGDQ campaign. I also highly recommend it as a one-shot adventure, but only if the players enjoy combat-heavy scenarios. At the end of the module, Gygax gives some final advice to the Dungeon Master. He says if you are using this module as part of the whole campaign, be certain to keep a careful note of all that the party does. You can do this by writing in the margin of the booklet. Any opponents which escape attacks by the party will give warning to their masters. Now, although Gygax doesn't mention it, this record keeping should also include the expenditure by the characters of their consumable supplies, because obviously there are no conveniently located shops in the Underdark where the characters could replenish their supplies. So how you as the DM are running this adventure will likely determine how the players approach it. By that I mean, if this module is being run as a one-shot, the players can explore the entire cavern in detail, systematically clearing out the entire place if they wish. However, if you're running this as part of the TGDQ campaign, the players will likely want to get through it as quickly as possible. And the reason for that is because it can quickly become a time and resource sink. Although the players won't realize it at the start, this module is relatively treasure poor compared to the resources they might have to expend to clear it out. The various Drow encounters and the Lich do have valuable magic items, but the chances of the characters acquiring them are small, especially those magic items belonging to the Lich. Otherwise, it's mostly just monetary valuables found in this module, and not a whole lot at that. After completing the module, the players may conclude that the juice was not worth the squeeze, as the saying goes. Alright, well that's all I have for now. If you enjoyed the video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Please leave a comment, let me know what you think. If you can, share the video. And anything you can do to help support the channel, I appreciate it. Thanks again, bye for now.